Ever get kind of tired of those alien invasion stories? You know, the ones that are all like spaceships and lasers and us fighting them off?
Yeah, it's a pretty common trope.
What if they came in peace instead?
Oh, that's interesting.
That's the whole idea behind this book, Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke.
Ah, a classic.
So we're going deep on it today. Why is it still such a big deal, even after like all these years since it was published?
It's definitely stood the test of time.
You sent me some notes and some parts of a podcast where they were talking about the book.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully those were helpful.
Totally. And it seems like even though these aliens, the overlords, are like totally peaceful, there's a whole lot more going on.
There are definitely layers to it. It's not as simple as it might seem at first glance.
So should we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So one of the first things that kind of struck me is that like these overlords, they show up and fix everything, right?
Yeah, they pretty much solve all of humanity's problems. War, poverty, disease, it all just vanishes.
But they don't actually like show themselves to us.
Right. Not for a long time. For the first 50 years of their presence, they remain completely hidden.
50 years. Why would they do that?
It's a clever move by Clarke, I think. By keeping them shrouded in mystery, he taps into one of our deepest fears, the fear of the unknown. Imagine that. Things are going great, better than ever, but you never actually see who's pulling the strings.
It would definitely make you wonder, like, what's the catch? What are they really up to?
Exactly. And that unanswered question, that lingering doubt, would eat away at you. It makes you question everything, even the good things.
It makes you think maybe utopia has a price tag. Now, the podcast you shared, they made a big deal about when the overlords finally revealed themselves. They were pretty vague about what they actually look like.
Yeah, they didn't want to spoil it.
Right. But they made it sound like it was a really big deal, like the way Clarke describes it is meant to tap into some really primal fears.
Oh, absolutely. You have to think about the time period when the book was written, 1953. The world was in the grip of the Cold War. Everyone was terrified of nuclear annihilation. And there's this growing fascination with UFOs.
So people were already kind of freaked out.
Exactly. And then Clarke drops this image that's meant to play on those existing anxieties, those fears of the unknown and the other.
But he doesn't use, like, spaceships or aliens with laser guns.
No. He does something much more clever, much more unsettling. He uses imagery from ancient mythology and folklore, things that have haunted humanity for centuries.
Oh, wow, I get it. Like things that are kind of hardwired into our subconscious, things that scare us on a really deep level.
Exactly. And the Overlord's appearance, it isn't about technology. It's about tapping into something far more primal, something that challenges our very understanding of what it means to be human.
Wow, that's kind of brilliant. He's not just telling a story about aliens. He's making us face our own fears, our own prejudices.
Precisely. He's asking us, can we truly embrace something so different from us, something that challenges our very definition of otherness?
It really makes you think about how we react to things we don't understand. Like, even if they're trying to help us, we might still be afraid of them just because they're different.
That's a very human response.
And, you know, speaking of help, the podcast also mentioned this thing about, like, the human children in the book and how they start to change under the Overlord's guidance.
Oh, yeah, that's a crucial part of the story. Definitely worth exploring.
I think we should dive into that more after the break. It sounds pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, the kids are, well, they're at the heart of what makes childhood's end so thought-provoking.
So before the break, we were talking about how those Overlords, they stay hidden for like 50 years.
Right.
And then when they finally do reveal themselves, they look, well, the podcast I listened to said it was pretty unsettling.
Oh, yeah, it's a really powerful moment in the book, and it's meant to be unsettling. Clarke, he was really playing with some deep-seated fears there.
So, like, why do you think he chose to make them look that way? I mean, it's not like your typical alien invasion story.
Well, you have to remember the context. This was 1953. The Cold War was in full swing. The threat of nuclear war was, like, very real. And there was this growing fascination with UFOs.
So people were already on edge.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then Clarke, he takes all that anxiety and fear, and he channels it into the Overlord's appearance.
But he doesn't, like, make them super high-tech or anything.
No, he does something much more clever. He draws on imagery from ancient mythology, from folklore, stuff that's been creeping people out for, like, centuries.
Oh, I see. Like things that are kind of hardwired into our brains to be afraid of.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so effective. It's not just a visual thing. It's something much deeper. It's primal.
So it's like he's tapping into this like universal fear of the unknown, of the other.
Right. And it's not just about fear. He's also forcing us to confront our own prejudices. Like, what is it about the Overlord's appearance that makes us so uncomfortable? What does that say about us?
It really makes you think. Okay, so we've talked about the overlords, but what about the human kids in the book? The podcast I listened to, they made it sound like something pretty major happens to them.
Yeah, the children are kind of at the center of the whole story. They're the ones who really experience the full impact of the Overlord's presence.
And what is that impact? What happens to them?
Well, it's a gradual process, but
Yeah.
essentially they start to evolve. They develop these incredible abilities, powers that we can barely even imagine.
Superpowers.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Telepathy, telekinesis, the ability to manipulate energy, things like that. And their understanding of the world, of reality itself, it changes completely.
So it's not just physical changes. It's like a mental and spiritual transformation too.
Exactly. And as they evolve, they start to create a world that is, well, it's completely alien to us. Our laws of physics, our understanding of reality, none of that applies to them anymore.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. So where do the adults fit into all of this? How do they react to their kids basically becoming like super beings?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. For a lot of the adults, it's terrifying. They see their kids changing, becoming something they don't recognize, and they're afraid.
I mean, I can understand that. It would be pretty freaky to see your kids suddenly developing like telepathic powers.
Oh, absolutely. And that fear, that resistance to change, it's a major theme in the book. Clarke seems to be saying that humanity's biggest obstacle isn't necessarily these external threats, but our own inability to adapt, to evolve.
Like we're our own worst enemies.
In a way, yeah. We cling to the familiar, even when it's holding us back.
So the overlords, they're not just there to like fix our problems. They're there to guide us through this transformation, even if it's scary.
That's a good way to put it. They see the potential in humanity, the potential for something greater. But they know we can't get there on our own. We need their help.
It's kind of like they're the cosmic parents we never knew we needed, but it's still kind of messed up, right? Like they're essentially orchestrating the end of humanity as we know it.
Well, it's not that simple. The Overlords, they're not forcing this on us. They're just facilitating a process that's already in motion. They see that humanity is evolving, and they're just helping us along.
So it's like our destiny is already set, and they're just helping us get there.
It's not that clear-cut. Clarke, he leaves a lot of room for interpretation. He doesn't give us easy answers. He wants us to think about these questions, to wrestle with them.
Okay, but what about the ending? The podcast I listened to, they made it sound like it was both amazing and kind of sad at the same time.
Yeah, the ending is definitely both of those things. It's bittersweet. It's about transcendence, about humanity reaching its full potential, but it's also about loss, the loss of the individual, the loss of our old way of life.
So it's like we achieve this incredible thing, but we have to give up a part of ourselves to get there.
That's a good way to put it. And it's up to the reader to decide whether that price is worth paying.
Wow. I mean, this is a lot to wrap my head around. It's not your typical alien invasion story. It's more like a philosophical exploration of what it means to be human.
That's exactly what it is. And that's what makes it so powerful, so enduring. It's a book that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. It makes you question everything.
And sometimes that's exactly what we need, right? A good dose of questioning everything.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've just about reached the end of our deep dive here. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I guess I would just say, Childhood's End, it's a book that challenges us to think about the big questions, the really big questions. What is our place in the universe? What does it mean to be human? What is the future of consciousness?
Big questions indeed.
And it reminds us that we don't always have the answers. Sometimes the most important thing is to just keep asking the questions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I want to thank you for taking this deep dive with me. I learned a lot.
My pleasure. It's always fun to talk about Clarke.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this wild ride through Childhood's End. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking up at the stars. So we've been talking about Childhood's End, and it's really made me think about how we view change.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of what Clarke was trying to explore in the book. Like, how do we react when faced with the unknown, with something that challenges our whole understanding of the world?
And, with the overlords and the way the children evolve in the book, it's like Clarke is saying that sometimes change is inevitable, even if it's scary or painful.
Definitely. And I think I think the adults' reactions in the story really highlight that fear of the unknown. They see their children changing, becoming something they no longer recognize, and it terrifies them.
Right? Like imagine seeing your kid suddenly develop these incredible powers, becoming something almost alien.
It would be incredibly unsettling. And Clarke, he doesn't shy away from that. He shows us the very human fear, the resistance to change, even when it might ultimately be for the best.
It's almost like he's saying that we can't cling to the past, even if it's comfortable, even if it's familiar. We have to be willing to let go, to evolve, or we'll be left behind.
Exactly. And, the overlords, they play a really interesting role in all of this. They're not just there to solve humanity's problems, they're there to guide us through this process of
But
transformation.
like they're the cosmic shepherds leading us towards, well, towards whatever comes next. But it's still a little creepy, right? Like they're essentially orchestrating the end of humanity as we know it.
I can see why you'd say that, but I don't think it's about control or manipulation. The overlords, they see the potential in humanity, the potential for something much greater than we can currently imagine. And they're just helping us to reach that potential, even if it means letting go of our old ways of thinking, of being.
So they're like, I don't know, cosmic midwives helping us through a really difficult birth. But like, what about free will? Do we even have a choice in all of this?
That's one of the big questions that Clarke leaves us with, and I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think it's more about recognizing that we're part of something much larger than ourselves, something that we might not fully understand. And sometimes maybe letting go of control is the key to truly evolving.
Okay, but what about the ending of the book? The podcast I listened to made it sound really powerful, but also kind of sad.
The ending is definitely both of those things. We see the culmination of the children's transformation, the emergence of this new form of consciousness, and it's incredibly beautiful and awe-inspiring.
Hmm.
But there's also a sense of loss, a sense of saying goodbye to the world as we know it.
It's like we achieve this incredible thing, this transcendence, but we also lose a part of ourselves in the process.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? That growth and change often come with loss, and that sometimes we have to let go of the old to make way for the new. And Clarke, he leaves it up to the reader to decide whether that price is worth paying.
Well, I don't know about you, but this deep dive has definitely left me with a lot to think about.
Me too. I think Childhood's End, it's one of those books that stays with you long after you finished reading it. It makes you question everything, and that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, it definitely challenges you to like expand your perspective, to think outside the box. So, to our listeners, if you're looking for a book that will make you think, that will make you question your place in the universe, I highly recommend checking out Childhood's End.
Couldn't agree more. It's a classic for a reason.
All right, well, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the mind-bending world of Arthur C. Clarke. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking up at the stars.